Hey guys, today we are in Luke chapter 15. Now, this chapter is probably one of the most well-known chapters out of Luke. This is the three parables. For those of you who were with us in Green Acres last summer, this is our VBS, right? We walked through Luke 15 and the whole week of VBS, and so um, what's most important about Luke chapter 15 is the first two verses. It sets up the whole chapter. And a lot of times we forget this. A lot of times we take these parables out of context. And so notice those first two verses. Now, remember, he's in Perea. He's walking south of Jericho to come to Jerusalem to be crucified, right? And so he's walking along, he's teaching, he's talking. This is the last time that he's going to be in this area. It's the last time he's going to be able to speak to these people before he dies, right? And so it says, now the tax collectors and the sinners were drawing near to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. And so this sets up the context. It sets up the setting. Why did Jesus tell these parables? It's because these tax collectors, these prostitutes, these well-known sinners were around him. And so the elite, the religious elite, the Pharisees, they were basically saying that how dare he be around these sinners? If he was really religious, he would part ways with them. He wouldn't be around them. And because of that reason, that's why he tells us these three parables. So each parable must go back to verses 1 and 2. Okay, helps us to understand the meaning. And a lot of these parables, there's lots of meanings and lots of religious things that we can take from it. But what was Jesus teaching about? He's walking with sinners, and the Pharisees said, oh, I can't believe he's with sinners. And then we get the parable of the lost sheep, right? We see that there's a shepherd. He has 100 sheep. He has 99. One is gone, right? One is gone. One is left, right? So what would you do? He goes after the one that is lost until he finds it. It's a couple interesting things about this, right? The sheep is the shepherds, okay? The sheep is the shepherds. He knows he had 100. Now he only has 99. It is the shepherds. He knows that he is missing. What do? Are you just happy that you have 99 and you just let the one wander off? No, because why? A sheep cannot save itself. A sheep would wander off, would fall in a cave, would starve, would be dehydrated. I mean, it could do lots of things. We talked many times about how dumb sheep really are, right? And so what happens? The shepherd goes after the sheep, right? The sheep can't save itself. So who's the person that can save the sheep? Only the shepherd. And so the shepherd goes with him. He finds him. He collects them. He rejoices. He goes home. And then he says, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Heaven cares about tax collectors and sinners. The Pharisees do not. Okay? And that's the main gist of this parable. Heaven cares. God cares about the tax collectors. God cares about the sinners, the prostitutes, those who are. God cares that. Even though the Pharisees don't, the religious don't, right? Because they would say, "Oh, I'm already with God. That's good enough." The sheep didn't care. It was only the shepherd who cared. Okay, that's the point. It's the pushback of saying the shepherd cared. God cares about the tax collectors. The Pharisees don't. God does. Then we get the second parable, the parable of the lost coin. And we had 100, he lost one, right? So that's only 1%, not that big of a deal. Now it kind of doubles down. Now we have a woman who has 10 coins and she's lost one. Now it's 10%, right? And this is getting a little weightier, right? We're kind of doubling down on these parables, right? But what happens? She knows she had 10. She only has 9, right? The coin was lost, but it's still claimed. It's still hers. She has misplaced it, but she knows it's hers. She knows it's there somewhere, so she has it. Much just like the shepherd. The shepherd knew he had 100, but now he had 99. So what does she do, right? She lights a lamp, she sweeps the house, she seeks diligently for it, she's looking for it, and when she finds it, what happens? She rejoices with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost. Much like the sheep, right? She rejoiced that little remnant, right? Most people would say, well, you still have 90%. Man, that's good enough. Good enough is not for God. God came for all, right? His cross was for all. And so, once again, heaven cares about the remnant. Heaven cares about the lost. So important. Now we come to the third parable, the parable of the prodigal son, the parable of the lost son. This is the one that we really all know, and it's a great story, and man, it's just done so many times on TV. But now what has happened? The parable doubles down even more, right? We had 100, we had 10, now we have 2, 50%, right? 50%. What happens? There was two brothers. One of them came and said, give me a share of your property that is coming to me. That's the same thing as a son looking at square into his father's eyes and saying, hey, I wish you were dead so I could have your inheritance. Go on and act like you're dead. Give me your inheritance and let me go on and live without you, right? And the father did. The father did it. Would I do it? I would not do it. Would you do it? You would not do it. The father did it, right? The father did it. And what happens? That son goes and it says he squanders his money. He loses it all in reckless living, right? And sinful living and just living it up in a worldly nature. What happens? A famine comes, right? Not just spending all of his money. The famine is not the son's fault. The famine is just a cause of nature. It's a part of nature that is now driving this brother to be what? To be hungry. He has no food. He cannot glean things from fields. He cannot get any other way. So now he has to take a job. Not only does he take a job, he takes the worst job. He's a pig. He's working with the pigs, right? In a Jewish custom, that would be horrible. That would be so bad that he couldn't do that. He wouldn't want to do that. He would not be clean. He would have to go in ceremonial wash. He couldn't go to the market. He couldn't be around a lot of people. This is a bad job, but he takes this job, and so much so that as he's feeding the slop to the pigs, he's like, man, I could really eat some of this slop. And then it was brought to his recollection that his father's workers, his servants, they don't worry about food. The father is good to them. He feeds them. He has them. He pays them. They have good. So he says, right, I'm going to go home, but I'm not going to go home as a son, right? I'm not going to go home as a son. I'm going to go home as a servant. I'm going to go home and say, I'm sorry. And what's interesting is we see in verse 18 that he actually does this, right? He goes and he says, he says, I have sinned before heaven and you. Now, remember, we talked about heaven is used as God, right? Remember, Jews couldn't say the name of God. They could not write the name of God. And so heaven is a word that was always synonymous with God. So he says, I've sinned against God. I've sinned against you, Father. And it says that he arose. He actually did it. He's actually going home to confess his sins and to humble himself before the Father. And he goes. And what happens? As he was a long ways off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran. Why would he do that? It was definitely against culture for grown men to run. Still is today. If you go to the Middle East, you're not going to see grown men run. It doesn't happen. It's not deemed culturally appropriate. But he runs because why? Much like the sheep, much like the woman with the coins, the Father has not forgotten the lost one. He has not forgot what is lost. Even though it was 1%, it was 10% with the lady with the coins, now it's 50%, the Father never forgets what he has lost. And it says he embraced him, he kissed him, he told him to bring his best robe, put a ring on, put shoes on his feet, kill the fattened calf. And all these things have a lot of meanings. We don't have enough time to get into them, but basically he's saying, Not that you're going to be a servant, but he is raising him back up to the level in which he left, that he is a son. He put a robe on him. He clothed. He put feet. He's not a servant. He put sandals on his feet. He's not a servant. He's not going to be a worker. He's a son. He gave him a ring, the signet ring. This was a ring that would say that I can speak for my father. I can go to the bank. I can do transactions. I can go to a lawyer. I can do transactions. And so the father doesn't just take him back as a servant. He brings him back and elevates him back to sonship, right? To an heir of the family. And now we see the other brother, verse 25, right? The older son was in the field. He came in. There was dancing. What has happened? Some workers tell him, your brother has come back. Your dad's throwing a party. Verse 28, he was angry and refused to go in. The other brother would not forgive. The brother that stayed would not forgive, right? And his father came out and he treated him, and he said, the son said to the father, look, I've been with you for many years. I've never disobeyed your commands, right? Which was a lie, right? It's a lie. All kids disobey their father. But when we are in emotional state, we seem to lie to ourselves and lie to our parents, lie to those who love us, and lie to God. You've never given me a young goat that I may celebrate, and here you're giving your prodigal son the fattened calf that does everything. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. Basically, the father is saying, son, I love you. I love you just as much as this other one. And it says in verse 32, it was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this was your brother was dead. He is alive. He was lost. He was found. It is right to celebrate over the one who comes. It is right to celebrate over the tax collectors and the sinners. So when you think of this prodigal son, when you think of the coins, when you think of the sheep, right? We have that idea, right? We have this idea that one is lost. What happens? God always seeks the lost. That's important. God has a heart for that. And when he finds it, he rejoices, he celebrates, he kills the fattened calf because he never forgets what is lost, right? At the very beginning of your Bible, Genesis chapter 2, chapter 3, God created everything and it was good. It was very good. God created all man and they were to walk with him and embrace him in a relationship. But through sin, we can no longer do that. We have been lost. And God sends his son so that we can be found, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. And even though some religious types might not forgive, they might not believe, they might not have these things, God is always looking. He's always looking to find those who will come to him. And that's what these parables are talking about. It was a direct assault against the Pharisees, who thought they had God, who thought they've never sinned, who thought they were walking right with God and thought like God and agreed with God, but yet they're learning they are nothing like God. God is a loving God who forgives and searches the lost, where the Pharisees is not a loving group of people. They don't search for anybody who's lost, and they only care about themselves. That's these parables. I hope that makes sense. Hope it puts it in a better view for you. Maybe you learned something new, but we will see you tomorrow in chapter 16. God bless.